So the other day I made a video on comparing costs of lumber, mainly store-bought lumber versus milling your own. And I posted that video to a Facebook group I'm on, because I am on a few different groups. I got a really good comment from a fellow named Raymond, and I'm going to show his comment right now. So I'll read his comment, and it is, you didn't account for cost of logs or even felling trees on your own property, nor did you account for your time that might have been invested in overtime pay or second job income. Then two, what was the purpose of the building? If only to house the sawmill, then it was what would have otherwise been an unnecessary expense. Aside from those points, yes, owning a sawmill can reduce costs of construction and maintenance of wooden buildings on your property. It's a really good comment, and he's got a lot of good points. I'm going to discuss them and go through them one by one. Ted, you in the video, buddy? This is Teddy. He is a Lhasa Poo. He's, how old is Teddy?
I'll be 7.
7 years old. The other dog you saw in my other video where I did in this chair with me was Dixie, the Shih Tzu. She's actually 12. And then we have Willow. Come here, Willow. Willow, our third dog, is a golden doodle, and she is three. So we have a 3-year-old golden doodle, a 7-year-old Lhasa Poo, and a 12-year-old Shih Tzu. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off track with the cute dogs. Let's get back to the video. So his first point was you didn't account for cost of logs or even felling trees on your own property. Nor did you account for your time. But it was kind of a longer sentence, but so his main point is you didn't account for buying the logs or your time for cutting the trees is what he's saying, which is a really good point. But let me say this. The logs that I'm milling right now are from the area that I cut for the mill to go in. It's about a 1/4 acre. So there was a lot of trees. I'm going to say probably, 70 to 80 trees, and at least a third of those probably were mill log grade, nice and straight, decent diameter. So I got a lot of mill logs that are ready to mill, mainly poplar, a little bit of white pine. And that's what I'm milling right now. So it doesn't cost me anything other than a little bit of saw gas and my time. I will say, if you had to buy your logs, it is going to cost you obviously money, but keep in mind, a lot of the stuff you're going to mill is softwood like eastern white pine, poplar, spruce, fir. A lot of that kind of wood isn't really that valuable. And a lot of it you can get for free from tree guys. I'm actually in the process of talking to a couple of local tree guys that I know, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to end up getting some free softwood logs brought to my house with their log truck, which would be really nice. It'd be a great thing because tree guys get paid to cut the wood down, and then they're stuck with the wood. If it's hardwood, they can make it into firewood, but most of the pine and the softwood type stuff they don't want, so it ends up getting chipped and just made into wood chips. So if you talk to one of your local tree people, you could probably end up finding a good source of free or very cheap logs, and they'll probably bring them right to your house. So the other point of his comment was you didn't account for your time. I didn't really account for my time, he's correct, but I look at this as a hobby. I don't consider it really working. I really enjoy milling, I enjoy firewood, enjoy being outside, running my tractors, all that kind of stuff. Like I said in the other video, in 2 full days, let's say 16 hours, I can mill about $3,000 worth of lumber. I mean, if you did the math, I think I calculated it out 600 to 800 board feet a day at $2 a board foot. So let's say you did $1,500 in 8 hours. I mean, you're talking almost $200 an hour. I think you're pretty hard pressed to find that kind of money in any other job. And if you did account for your time, you're making a lot of money per hour with the mill, so it's kind of hard to say that you're not going to get ahead hourly with that kind of profit margin. And then the last part of his comment on that one was you didn't account for, you could have been doing a secondary job or adding overtime to your main job. Without getting into my personal life, my main job is salary, and I can't get overtime. It's not a possibility for me. So that's really not part of the equation. And I've had secondary jobs in the past. I've done 2-3 jobs at one time. And the reality is, I'm getting older. My family's getting older. I really enjoy being home with my family. Having the mill here and the firewood and this big property gives me the availability and the option to do things around the property and call my own shots. So it gives me the option to work when I want, if I want, how long I want, all that kind of stuff. If you're adding hours to your main job or you're doing a secondary job, chances are it's going to be away from home and you're not going to have the availability or the option to come home whenever you want. So to me, I would rather be home doing my own thing, calling my own hours and shots than being at some other job working for someone else. But everyone's different, and if you would rather work extra hours at your job, that's up to you. So another thing to consider is, like I said, I can mill about $200 of lumber per hour. I think you can have a hard time finding a secondary job or additional hours with overtime in your main job where you're going to make that kind of money. So a second point was then too, what was the purpose of the building? If only to house the sawmill, then it was what would have otherwise been an unnecessary expense. That's a great point. So basically what he's saying is if you didn't have the sawmill, you wouldn't need the sawmill shed, which is true. So he brings up a really good point, but keep in mind, I chose that example because that's what I happened to be building. That's the first building I built for the mill, and it's just what I used for the example that day in that video. If I really wanted to make the milling look more attractive monetarily wise, I would have chosen a much bigger building with walls, which would have meant a lot more lumber. That building was $3,300, but it was only 12 by 24 with no walls, so it's just a roof, open air structure. If I chose something like, let's say a 24 by 24 barn, or garage, or workshop, and included walls, maybe even a second story, that $3,300 easily could have turned into 10, 15, even 20 grand. So milling, 600 to 800 board feet a day, even if you spent a solid week milling your lumber, you're gonna have 4,000 or 5,000 board feet milled up, and you could build a really big building for, like I said, 10, 15, maybe 20 grand. So I mean, at the end of the day, that example was specifically for the sawmill shed, but I could have just as easily have done an example on a much bigger building that had nothing to do with the sawmill. It could have been a workshop for woodworking, welding, for tractor barn, anything like that. So although I get his point, I just happened to do that for that video. I'm going to build a lot more buildings and do a lot more things than just that one building. So I'm going to save a lot more money than that $3,300. So his last kind of comment was, aside from those points, yes, owning a sawmill can reduce costs of construction and maintenance of wooden buildings in your property. So I'm going to kind of disagree with what he's saying. You can use a sawmill for a lot more than just wooden buildings in your property and maintaining them. You can make lumber for buildings. You can make lumber, you can make live edge slabs and sell them to people for countertops. You can make lumber for cabinets, hardwood flooring. You could do raised bed gardens. There's a lot of things you could do with your mill and make and sell to other people aside from just repairing wooden buildings in your property. So although that's one thing you could do with the mill, there's a lot of other things you could do also, and a lot of them are going to be a lot more profitable for you than just repairing wooden buildings in your property. I mean, you could sell one cherry slab or one black walnut slab and get a lot of money. So he had a lot of good points, but I still maintain that owning a mill is going to save you money and it can potentially make you a lot of money. It's probably one of the quickest paybacks of any kind of equipment you're going to buy. Trailer, tractor, truck, anything like that. I think a sawmill has to be one of the quickest paybacks. And also, I think it's worth noting, I bought the HM130 Max with an extension, which is Woodland Mill's biggest mill, with an extension so I could do full 16-foot lumber. The base sawmill does about 10.5-foot lumber. I could have just as easily have bought in the HM122, which is a smaller mill. They also have the HM126, which is the mid-size mill. So I could have bought a mill and spent a lot less money than I spent. Instead of spending $6 grand, I probably could have spent $3 grand and done most of the same stuff. So I think if you're going to compare apples to apples, you got to realize that I bought one of their biggest mill, but you could also spend 50 grand or 60 grand on an all hydraulic wood miser. So there's a lot of different mills, But for me, what I'm doing around my property, maybe selling a little bit here and there, I think that was a good choice. It's not the bottom of the barrel as far as sawmills, and it's definitely not the best. There are faster mills that are more capable, but that mill is plenty capable for what I want to do. But I do want to say thank you to Raymond. That was a great comment, and I really enjoyed rebutting it in this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.